So, I'm just kind of like, going with the flow.
Whitney Houston, the voice. A voice that only comes around once in a lifetime. Her voice opened doors all over the world for every female artist who came after her.
It's an undescribable feeling, it's like a surge of energy. It's like just taking off and just flying.
The tabloid scrutiny she faced acts perhaps as feminist cautionary tale. She gave up so much for one man, and in doing so, gave up so much of herself and her extraordinary talent. Her desire for the security of marriage obscured everything else. Who's to say Bobby Brown was a bad person? It is clear that Bobby and Whitney as a couple were unable or unwilling to support each other. Rather, they enabled each other to follow destructive paths of behavior. Whitney's life was complicated and it ended tragically, but her musical legacy is so much more.
I have nothing if I don't have
Whitney Elizabeth Houston was born on August 9, 1963. She grew up in Newark, New Jersey, the daughter of John R. Houston, who would one day manage her production company, and acclaimed gospel singer Cissy Houston.
From an early age, she was able to be around, the stars of gospel and R&B. People like Aretha Franklin was, kind of a godmother figure. Dionne Warwick was a relative. BB and CeCe Winans were also people she spent time around. So she was never too far from that sort of scene, even being in Newark, New Jersey, which isn't, these days really considered to be the epicenter of much of anything, let alone the music industry.
Her mother was a very, very famous singer. Her mom sang with people like Elvis, Luther Vandross, and just every star you can think of. Cissy was very well known in the circuit as the great voice because she had this high octave thing going on. A lot of records, people don't realize Cissy is actually doing this, the backing vocals on.
It's so hard to do.
Cissy had a moderately successful solo career, but it would never reach the same heights as her daughter. Cissy put her all into making sure she would succeed, teaching her how to sing from the mind, the body, and most importantly, the heart.
No matter what happens, you always see that with Whitney. She really loves gospel music. She was obsessed with it. All of her best friends were church people. I mean, even to the end. People like Kim Burrell, the Winans family as well. When I look at that, it tells me that for Whitney, it was really important, that part of her life.
Their life really was all about the church. Now, this means that they had a huge extended family around them, and she was in no two minds what was important, and it was her mum, her dad, her family, and religion.
I think coming from that world into this music industry, which is filled with vultures and everything else, I mean, that's got to be tough for someone who's like 17, That's a big shift. I don't know, even if your mother was in that industry, I don't know if you're prepared for that.
The first song that Whitney ever performed was Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, and she performed that at the age of 11 when she was a pupil at a Catholic girls' school. And the last song she ever sang was Jesus Loves Me. So her life was framed either side by two songs, both of them devotional.
Sissy was tough on her daughter. For example, in practice sessions, she would make her repeat notes and musical phrases over and over again, striving for perfection. But this tough love and desire for excellence led to friction between mother and daughter. Their relationship came under more strain after her parents' divorce. John, her father, was a very jealous man, and suspecting that Sissy was having an affair, he tapped the home phone and found out that she was in fact having an affair with the minister from church. This was a particularly devastating blow for Whitney, as the church had always been her safe space, where she sought solace when singing there many times a week, which had now been tainted. Whitney decided at the age of 18 to leave home, and tellingly, she did not let her mother know where she had moved to. In fact, she became roommates with Robin Crawford, her best friend from the private Catholic school she had attended.
As well as being a young singer, Whitney became a model too. In fact, she was the first black female to grace the cover of 17 magazine in America. This was huge. And yes, she's known as the voice, but my goodness, she had the face too.
However, Whitney had bigger plans, seeing herself not as a fashion clothes horse, but as a singer. Reconciling with her mother, she at first sang backing vocals in her show, until one day, Sissy tricked her into singing lead vocals by calling her on the phone and claiming she had a fever and couldn't sing. Now, wanting not to let her down, Whitney went on stage and performed her mother's set. Whitney's big break came in 1983 when the legendary producer and executive of Arista Records, Clive Davis, went to a New York nightclub where Whitney was performing. Immediately recognizing her immense talent, he signed her on the spot. Later that same year, the young singer made her national television debut on the very popular Merv Griffin Show.
A world full of love, like yours, like mine, like
Houston did not begin work on an album immediately, as knowing he had someone very special on his books, Clive Davis wanted to ensure he had the right material and producers for her debut album, eventually bringing to the studio talent such as Jermaine Jackson, Narada Michael Walden, Teddy Pendergrass, and Kashif. In the early days, there were accusations of Whitney only being signed by Clive Davis because of the connection she had in the business.
I would like to think that what I have, what's been God-given to me, would have gotten me into it, anyway. It's one thing for having your mom and your cousin being so successful in the business, but it's something that you have to do on your own, You have to establish your own abilities. I mean, it's great to have them as my family and, it got me a lot of places, but I'd like to think I could do it on my own.
Whitney Houston was a pop producer's dream. Now we're used to manufactured girls, boys coming out who look perfect, and we kind of know that they won't be able to sing very well. Whitney Houston had the face, the body, the charm, that wayward, she was so charismatic, she filled the room.
But the first song that drew my attention to Whitney was Saving All My Love.
tonight is the night that I'm feeling alright. We'll be making love the whole night through. So I'm saving
I mean, that song, first of all, let's talk about that time. We had kind of come through the disco era for black females to look up to. It was Diana Ross. You know, Diana Ross was the icon. She was the one that had the model looks, maybe not the best voice in the world, but very distinctive, and you knew that Diana Ross voice when you heard it. And we hadn't had someone look like that and sing great and that whole proper diva thing. We hadn't had that. And when Whitney Houston came along, she was like the new Diana Ross, but she had this voice on top of it. And so you heard Saving All My Love, and then MTV was only starting to get a bit big then.
Early on, MTV was, for the most part, playing specifically white rock bands. Michael Jackson famously was unable to get on MTV for a very long time.
How Will I Know, which was Whitney's third US single, went to #1 and was really the first time that a young African-American woman was all over MTV. That video was massively successful. It was on constantly, and it really cemented Whitney's presence in mainstream America.
How will I know if he really loves me? I say a prayer with every heartbeat. I fall in love whenever we meet. I'm asking you what you know about these things. How will I know if he's thinking of me? I try to fall, but I'm too shy. Falling in love is so bittersweet. This love is strong, but I feel weak.
Houston won 7 American Music Awards in total in 1986 and 1987, plus a Grammy and an MTV Video Music Award. Her debut album is listed as one of Rolling Stone's 500 greatest albums of all time and on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's definitive 200 list. Following her breakthrough, doors were opened for other African-American women, such as Janet Jackson and Anita Baker, to find notable success in popular music and on MTV.
The song I Want to Dance With Somebody, again, just encapsulated how vibrant she was. I remember the video well. It was on MTV all the time. No small feat. She was the first black female to be on MTV pretty much constantly. Her enthusiasm and innocence just shone through. Arlene Phillips, one of the dance choreographers she worked with, said she was a joy to work with. She was kind of a bit gangly and shy. I don't know if I want to dance, but as soon as she did it, you knew watching that video, not only was she the star of that video, no matter who was in the background, but she was there, she was going to have a long, lasting career.
Her next 3 singles, Didn't We Almost Have It All, So Emotional, and Where Do Broken Hearts Go, all peaked at #1 on the US Hot 100 chart. This continuation of #1 hits established Whitney as the only artist ever to have 7 consecutive chart toppers, surpassing records previously set by the Beatles and the Bee Gees. Now America's sweetheart, she was able to speak about causes close to her heart, including Nelson Mandela and the anti-apartheid movement.
1988, Wembley Stadium. It was the most watched television program in the history of the world to that moment. And Whitney had flown over from the States to participate. She had always participated in the anti-apartheid movement. There was read from the stage a message from Nelson Mandela, who was still in prison in Robben Island in South Africa. And he said how grateful he was to all the artists who were participating. especially Whitney Houston, who has given so much pleasure to my fellow prisoners and I on Robin. And I said I was interviewing her for television, on television, live television. And I said, well, you heard it. He singled you out.
She would be in the homes of millions more later that year when she recorded a song for the coverage of the 1988 Summer Olympics, One Moment in Time. However, rumors started to circulate about Whitney's sexual orientation. After moving in with Robin Crawford, the pair became inseparable. At the time, no one wanted anything to disrupt this bullet train that was Whitney Houston. She was the first mainstream African-American female superstar, and the team surrounding Whitney was worried that this rumor might be her downfall in the conservative Reagan-Bush climate of the era.
Widely known in show business that Whitney and Robin were together. And this was not some kind of scandalous pickup. They'd known each other from high school.
Most of the rumors in Whitney Houston's case have been confirmed by very close sources, such as her bodyguard, family members.
There's a phrase in psychology known as cognitive dissonance. And this is a problem that's caused when people are one thing when they face the world and another thing when they face themselves. So if you were saying, like Whitney did, that I am a good girl, I'm an honest girl, I'm an all-American girl, I am who I say I am, I'm a heterosexual girl, when you're saying all those things to the world and the truth might be slightly different, that creates all kinds of problems, particularly when you have a religious upbringing like she did, because what it means is she's not just being dishonest to other people and dishonest to herself, she's also being dishonest to God.
I don't think it'll really change perception of her either way. I think it only makes what happened in her death and her addiction and her marriage that much more sad.
And you know, there have been theories about Whitney's drug use, including, you know, some gay activists who have said that if Whitney had been allowed to live as a lesbian woman, she wouldn't have had all these drug demons. It's absolutely tragic. And the truth is, the only person who knows is Whitney.
Robin certainly had real influence over Whitney. Being the only one who could get her out of bed or tell her what to do, her management team and family members did not like the control she had over Whitney, and so they wanted to break up this relationship. Whitney felt like control was being taken away from her. Some critics believe that she was selling out, arguing that her singing on recordings lacked the soul that was present during her live concerts. At the 1989 Soul Train Music Awards, when Houston's name was called for a nomination, a few in the audience jeered.
I loved what she said because she sort of came out when she went to accept her award. She said, you know, you have to do what you have to do to get to where you want to go sometimes.
But with I'm Your Baby Tonight, it did show that she kind of recognized what her critics were saying about her, that her sound wasn't tough enough, that wasn't soulful enough. So what she did was, in 1990, she got Luther Vandross, L.A. Reid, Babyface. The reception of the record was commercially fantastic. I mean, Whitney Houston had just all kinds of commercial momentum. She could release pretty much anything. It would be a major hit.
The 25th Super Bowl in 1991 silenced those critics who had claimed Whitney had lost her soul when her rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner became the gold standard for all those singers who followed.
Every single other person that's come and sung it, I don't remember, except her one. She completely nailed it.
This was and is now still one of the greatest moments in NFL history. At the time America was in the Gulf War, a lot of people had sons and daughters overseas. It was a time of great patriotism, and at the same time, you know, anytime you're at war, there's this deep insecurity and fear.
And she rocked up with a little bow in her hair, a tracksuit or a jumpsuit. Never before had a national anthem been released and zoomed into the top 5. It was a huge achievement, and no wonder. And again, Americans just kept loving her more. That was their song. This was their girl.
To this day, I cry every time I hear it. The most beautiful rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner that has ever been done before or since. It was a defining moment in Whitney's career. She was America's beloved daughter for doing such an extraordinary job on such a significant song at such an important time.
It's an undescribable feeling, you know, it's like a surge of energy. It's like just taking off and just flying.
Throughout the 1980s, Houston was romantically linked to a number of men, including musician Jermaine Jackson, American football star Randall Cunningham, and actor Eddie Murphy. But it was at the 1989 Soul Train Music Awards when she first met the R&B singer Bobby Brown.
The headlines were kind of like, what? What are these people doing together? He was a bit of a ladies' man, a real bad boy who already had kids, lots of exes. And I think people worried.
When Whitney met Bobby, he was just about as successful as she was. He was very popular, and he had all this confidence and swagger.
Although on paper it doesn't work, Bobby Brown and Whitney got on so well because he treated her like a normal girl. And she said that many guys were just so scared of her and wanted to be overly nice that she was massively attracted to this guy who was gentlemanly but had nothing to prove. And she says that all he knew she needed was love. There was chemistry, full stop. Of course it shouldn't have worked, but how many girls know they shouldn't have gone out with a bad guy but can't help that feeling, that gut feeling that you're just for some reason attracted to him, that you want to be with him. She was magnetized to him.
One of the other avenues that Whitney Houston had began to tentatively explore in the early 90s was acting.
The Bodyguard cemented Whitney's role really as an iconic legend. You know, she'd already kind of been hailed as this extraordinary voice and beauty, but with The Bodyguard, she was a movie star. She was great in the movie. She's not a natural actress, but she did everything well enough. She was intelligent enough to read the lines in a believable way. She had great chemistry with Kevin, who really fought for Whitney in the role. He said, in fact, he said at her funeral, a lot of guys could have played my part, but only one person could have been Rachel Marin.
The soundtrack itself was just Whitney Houston's biggest hit of her entire career, which was saying something because her first album sold 13 million copies.
I Will Always Love You, what a choice of song. Funnily enough, it nearly wasn't to be. They had another song in mind which had been released a few months earlier, so decided to go with I Will Always Love You because it hadn't been released for years. It was #1 for 20 consecutive weeks in America. Dolly Parton says, "Thank you, Whitney, for making this a far more beautiful song than I could ever have hoped to."
The Bodyguard was a runaway success, and Whitney became even more adored. Unfortunately, this success was not conducive to a happy marriage, with Bobby Brown feeling more and more sidelined as he realized he could never burn as bright as would his famous wife. With his ego knocked by being called Mr. Houston, Bobby was obviously jealous, but could not admit to this gnawing emotion. In an attempt to make her husband happy, Whitney stepped down from her commitments in an attempt to buoy him up. But still, Bobby did things on purpose to hurt and belittle his more successful wife.
He had an image as a tough guy. That's what he was trying to project. And Whitney, when introduced to drugs, couldn't handle it.
Now, Whitney Houston hadn't been around drugs, but when somebody you adore introduces you to something and you try it and you like it and you want to be with them, it's a recipe for disaster. And although she had been clean living in the past, perhaps she had an addictive personality all along. It's just that the man who ignited this in her was Bobby Brown.
She had all sorts of problems with addiction, and so did he. And they both had, very troubled upbringings, and they both, to a greater or lesser degree, had issues around self-esteem. Neither of them were really strong or indeed very powerful or indeed very congruent people who were easy with themselves.
If you look at the dynamic between Whitney and Bobby over the years, again and again, you see a woman who is trying to bring herself down to the level of someone else so that he doesn't feel threatened and he feels comfortable.
Just the association with Bobby Brown in the beginning, not even, her own behavior, the cracks started to show a little more. People started to see her as, well, maybe we don't know everything about Whitney Houston. Maybe there's some things going on behind the scenes.
Whitney had always wanted the fairy tale marriage. Wanting to prove that she wasn't like her mother, a divorcee, she believed she was in love with Bobby, and nobody could persuade her otherwise as she remained in such a toxic relationship. And on March 13th, 1993, Bobby Christina Brown was born. After suffering a miscarriage on the set of The Bodyguard, Whitney wanted her daughter, Bobby, to be with her at all times.
Having a baby, I'm looking forward to that. Raising a child, hearing mommy, that's what's foremost in my head right now. I can't, the movie's done, the soundtrack's done. Thinking about doing a gospel album, So, I'm just kind of like, going with the flow.
During this period of her life, Whitney started canceling tours and dates. It was obvious to those close to the couple that they were taking illegal substances, and nothing anyone could say or do could stop them.
And they created what is no doubt a kind of codependency. It locks two people together into this world where each one of them thinks the other person is the only person that truly understands them, the only person that truly loves them, the only person that truly sees them for who they are. So to the point where Whitney actually said, he was my drug. When we fight, it's love. So they descended into this world of alcohol, prescription drugs, cocaine, whatever stories are true and whatever aren't true. We know it was a world full of addiction.
The song I Have Nothing is a typical example of the power of Whitney Houston's voice. When she sang, it was undeniable. Like, you couldn't look away. It was compelling. What's interesting about that song is the words are, I have nothing without you. And I think it really was how Whitney felt about Bobby Brown at that time. Whitney had the world at her feet, but yet she constantly submitted herself to him. They became kind of codependently linked in a very destructive way, but I don't think anything, the fame, the talent, the money, meant anything to her, nearly close as much as it did, to be loved by him.
In the wake of her blossoming acting career, in movies such as Waiting to Exhale and The Preacher's Wife, the rumors of drug abuse which surfaced in the press after Houston missed several appearances harmed her reputation. An example of this is when Houston was scheduled to appear on The Rosie O'Donnell Show in October 1997 to promote the film Cinderella, but canceled at the last minute, claiming stomach flu. Despite Houston's claims that her absences and cancellations of shows were due to real illnesses, the rumor mill still published stories of bad behavior linked to drug abuse. Just as Houston was battling these rumors, she was also promoting her first studio album in 7 years. With her roles in a number of films, Whitney had broadened her demographic, and she now had an even bigger audience for her music.
My Love Is Your Love actually took 8 years to make. This came after a lot of kind of train wreck personal life stuff with drug issues, fights in the marriage with her and Bobby, all kinds of trouble. She came out of that recording this album. Originally, it was going to be a greatest hits album with a couple of new songs, but actually once they got in the studio, she had great collaborators on this, including Missy Elliott, some great songs. It turned into an album all by itself.
My Love Is Your Love, without really compromising her sound too much. You know, it wasn't her just trying to get on on a hardcore hip hop track, a Timbaland beat or anything like that. It really just kind of showed that she was able to translate her voice into something that had a little more edge to it, but without really alienating any of her prior fan base.
The song My Love Is Your Love was amazing on so many fronts because an awful lot of critics had, dismissed Whitney as a thing of the past. And I guess her fans were turning their back looking at new music. And when this song came out, it was awesome because it had a slight reggae feel. It was a million miles from the pop you might associate her with. Wyclef Jean, Lauryn Hill from the Fugees were the sound of the moment. They were working with her on this song. So all of a sudden, she didn't just please her old fans, but a young generation sat up and thought, this is a cool sound.
With Robin Crawford, Whitney's oldest friend, with her best interest at heart, still involved with Whitney and her team, there was still a voice of reason in this shifting landscape. Unfortunately, the power struggle between Robin and Whitney's husband, Bobby, resulted in an ultimatum. Knowing that Bobby was a seriously bad influence on Whitney and that their current behaviors and practices would destroy her, Robin gave her friend a choice. It's going to be me or Bobby. When Whitney replied, "Tell her I accept her resignation," they did not speak for years, and her ally was gone from her life when arguably she needed her most. Whitney's father, John, finally had total control. She loved him and trusted him, but this blind faith resulted in many people taking advantage of her financially, including her own father.
After the success of My Love Is Your Love, she signed with Arista Records for what was then the most lucrative record deal of all time. It was 9 figures for 6 albums. But, at that point, not only was her, her drug and alcohol abuse kind of spiraling out of control, the bigger issue was that it was all becoming more public.
I love the children. People do much for the kids. Whitney loves and believes in children. I do. Hello.
Fans were worried about Whitney's health when she made an appearance on Michael Jackson's 30th anniversary special, where her extremely thin frame further spurred rumors of drug use. Houston's publicist revealed what was wrong. Whitney has been under stress due to family matters, and when she's under stress, she doesn't eat. Shockingly, these family matters were a reference to the fact that Whitney's own father had been stealing huge sums of money from her. The company, John Houston Enterprise, started by her father to manage her career, was actually run by company president Kevin Skinner. When she realized they had both been meddling with what was not theirs, she cut her father off completely. Her father demanded millions for brokering the $100 million album deal with her record company. Nippy had always been Daddy's little girl, but she knew now that he had completely betrayed her trust and tried to take everything that she had worked so hard for over the last 20 years. His betrayal broke her spirit to the point where she didn't even see him before he died in 2003. She didn't go to the funeral either, but did visit the night before to close that sad chapter in her life. Shortly after finding out about her father's disloyalty, she gave an arrestingly honest interview with Diane Sawyer, set up to promote her new album, but also addressing her drug use and her marriage, among other topics.
The Diane Sawyer interview was absolutely astonishing. You had Whitney come in, sit down very regally, as you'd expect, trying to keep herself together, and you thought, okay, maybe she's all right here. When Diane Sawyer went for the jugular and asked her the tricky questions, as a good journalist should, did you take crack? She was, you could tell, very angry and trying to suppress that.
It's not just thin.
No, what is it? Diane, tell me. Do you know?
It's scary thin. Whitney dying, crack rehab fails.
First of all, let's get one thing straight. Crack is cheap. I make too much money to ever smoke crack. Let's get that straight, okay? We don't do crack. We don't do that. Crack is whack.
And she came across as very disjointed, jumpy. If she hadn't taken anything, any drugs then she certainly had quite recently before, as later came to be the truth. But she was very emotional and fragile, and it's hard to watch because now we know just how much of a lie she was living.
December 2002 saw the release of Houston's 5th studio album entitled Just Whitney. The fact that this was the first album where Clive Davis was not the producer took its toll on the sound. It is probably the least memorable in her discography. The team who worked on the album said how hard it was to record with her, with Whitney refusing to leave her room for days. So wasting expensive studio time, the team had an uphill battle, especially with the record label desperate to launch another money-spinning record. This was a dark time for Whitney, who had been in and out of rehab numerous times. Perhaps the problem was that each time she went, it was always for someone else.
Recovery rates from addiction are quite low. I mean, if even Alcoholics Anonymous, which is one of the most famous and probably still the most successful recovery program, 1 in 4 maybe actually recover? The people an addict chooses to surround herself with or himself with are going to determine the success or failure of their recovery process. If you look at what Whitney did, who did she go to? She went to a co-addict. She went to somebody else who effectively, to a greater or lesser degree, was a mirror of her. So far from helping her to recover, he could give her the illusion that her behaviour was kind of acceptable because he was doing it too. And therein lies the road to ruin.
Drug abuse in the marriage did not abate, and as a consequence, in December 2003, Bobby Brown was charged with battery following an altercation during which he threatened to beat Houston and then assaulted her, with police reporting that Houston had visible injuries to her face. This did not stop Bravo Network commissioning in early 2004 the reality TV program Being Bobby Brown, a show which purported to broadcast the domestic goings-on in the Brown household.
The executives at the channel would not even consider the show unless Whitney agreed to appear. Bobby was desperate to get some fame on his own, apart from his wife, so he persuaded her to be on the show. When Whitney agreed to be filmed, the show got the green light. But it was one of the worst decisions she ever made. For the rest of, film history, we can watch these scenes of a deteriorating Whitney talking about bowel movements, talking about being drunk, clearly under the influence of all kinds of drugs.
You could see him trying to drag his power back from Whitney. Like when he said one day when she came into the room, you know, Jack be nimble, Jack be quick, bring that ass in here quick, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with it. And that's a man who's trying to sit down and say, don't think she's the boss, I am.
It is train wreck television. You would see Bobby Brown just, you know, delusions of grandeur, ego out of control, drinking during the day, and Whitney Houston during the same.
The show was not renewed for a second season after Houston stated that she would no longer appear in it. And Brown and Bravo could not come to an agreement for another season, which again created more tension between Whitney and Bobby, a man who still seemed jealous of his wife and intent on being in the show business spotlight himself. Eventually, the couple filed for divorce in September 2006.
A man like Bobby Brown doesn't want to be Mr. Houston. He wants his wife to be Mrs. Brown. And because that could never happen, the implications for their marriage were severe and damaging.
She did it for her husband, she did it to help him, and it was very typical of their relationship that everything she did to help him just brought her down.
Some sneakers. Get the Pumas over there. Fly. You didn't like the jeans?
Wipe my kisses off. One more time.
Stop.
One more time.
Stop. You didn't like the jeans?
Unfortunately, my daughter and my wife gangs up on me. They want to do me harm, y'all. Ooh, if she wasn't my wife, that wasn't my daughter.
Okay? And some shoes, okay? Sneakers and some shirts, that's all.
Daddy, for real, stop.
She don't want. She don't feel right now.
What'd I do?
It's not what you did. It's you. It's not you.
Understand you women.
Now an emergency. Hi, how you doing? This is security from Beverly Hilton. Hi, what's going on? I need paramedics. Apparently, I got a 46-year-old female found in the bathrooms. That's all I've got right now, but they're requesting paramedics. Oh, okay. Female fell in the bathroom. What room is she in? I'm not sure if she fell or she was in the bathroom with the water. 434, I'm sorry. That's room 434? Yes. Okay, and there's not east, west, or anything else? It's room 434? Yeah. Okay, and you don't know if she's conscious of breathing at all? Apparently she wasn't breathing, and she's 46-year-old. She was not breathing? Yes. Okay, but she is breathing now? I don't know. Okay. She was, the person that called me was irate and didn't get much out of her. Okay, I've got security going there now.
The real victim of this sorry saga is perhaps Whitney's daughter, Bobby Christina, who suffered tremendously as a result of her parents' dysfunctional marriage.
And let's spare a thought for Bobby Christina. This is a girl who's grown up with parents, both of whom are addicts. Allegedly, she's been sitting in the back of a car when Whitney and Bobby were using crack cocaine. This is a child whose role models, parental role models, are models of denial, models of addiction, and models of people who are living lives which are destructive and addictive.
In later years, Whitney is alleged to have partied with Bobby Christina as if they were this buddy to do drugs with.
Determined to be free of her addictions and become the mother figure for her daughter that she'd always wanted to be, Whitney entered a 14-week drug rehabilitation program. Unable to complete this rehab due to a surprising lack of funds, Whitney decided to save herself and her daughter. Her only course of action was to record new music and go on tour. With her inner circle advising her against this, Whitney felt there was no other option at this point, and so released a new album, I Look to You, in August 2009.
When Whitney came back with I Look to You, it really was supposed to be a big comeback. And if you look at the words to the song, it really is about asking God for strength. This was Whitney's kind of coming back, not just to the public, but to her own roots, her very deep, cemented belief in God, which she had throughout her life.
I think at that point, her public life, the idea of Whitney Houston as, you know, a drug casualty, as a reality TV casualty, really overshadowed her music career. And I Look to You, it kind of came and went. At that point, Whitney Houston kind of ceased to be a pop singer.
Whitney's infamous 2010 comeback tour, which was around Europe and the UK, drew a lot of fans who were ultimately very disappointed with what they heard. Almost universally, the tour was ravaged by fans and critics alike. Whitney was erratic, her voice was totally not on form, and all kinds of videos leaked on YouTube about her forgetting words, forgetting what she was supposed to say, and seemingly intoxicated. The world really saw it up close when she performed on the UK show The X Factor. Her dress was literally coming down on stage, and she didn't notice.
Although understandably disappointed, Whitney was keen to move forward, and in the remake of the 1976 film Sparkle, she found a project that she was passionate about. So much so that she became executive producer, as well as a star alongside Jordan Sparks as her not-so-encouraging mother. It was clear to the cast and crew that when Whitney first arrived on the set of Sparkle, that she had just left the rehabilitation center again. But as production got underway, everyone noticed a complete shift, with purpose and focus in her life through having a stake in the film, as well as knowing that she was with people who wanted to be working with her. Whitney enjoyed the process, and in fact, when the film wrapped, she did not want to leave and go back to her reality.
For the most part, Whitney stayed away from LA. She spent a lot of time in Atlanta, where she lived in a big house. Didn't really do much, didn't really work, just kind of hung around. Coming out to LA for the Grammys was a big deal for her.
The last song that Whitney publicly sang was Jesus Loves Me. It was an impromptu performance for her friend, the singer Kelly Price, who the next day was going to be receiving a Grammy Award. And it was heartbreaking because that was going to be the final song. Then how poignant that she's talking to Jesus, that religion means so much to her, and she wasn't to know that the next day she'd be gone.
Tragically, 2 days later, on February 11th, Houston was found unconscious in Suite 434 at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. Beverly Hills paramedics arrived at approximately 3:30 p.m., found Houston unresponsive, and performed CPR. Houston was pronounced dead at 3:55 p.m. The cause of death was not immediately known, though local police confirmed that there were no obvious signs of criminal intent. On March 22, 2012, the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office reported that Houston's death was caused by drowning and the effects of atherosclerotic heart disease and cocaine use. The office stated the levels of cocaine found in Houston's body indicated that she had used the substance shortly before her death. Toxicology results revealed additional drugs in her system: Benadryl, Xanax, cannabis, and Flexeril. The manner of death was documented as being an accident. Whitney's untimely death sent shockwaves around the world. No one could quite believe that America's sweetheart was gone. On July 26, 2015, Whitney's daughter, Bobby Christina, was found unconscious in a filled bathtub in her home, chillingly mirroring her mother's death. Sadly, after being in a coma for nearly 6 months, Bobby, at the very young age of 22, died from lobar pneumonia.
Clive Davis, who was such a great friend, said publicly, and we actually know this is true, that she had said to him, I really want to get back. By August this year, I'm going to have given up smoking completely. I'm going to be your girl.
Whitney Houston's death really did reverberate around the world. You know, sometimes I think you don't realize what an iconic figure someone is until they're gone.
There'll never be another Whitney. There's only one Whitney Houston, you know, and there'll never be another one.
There's two great lines from Whitney. One, she said, I am my own worst enemy. And in one of her most famous and moving songs, really, which is I Have Nothing, she said, I can't hide from myself. I can't run from myself.
So many singers still want to be just like Whitney Houston. With her pure talent, charisma, that voice, strong but soothing, soulful, classy, timeless. She began as a perfect pop princess and matured into a true soul diva. Whitney's life was complicated, and it ended tragically. But her musical legacy is so much more.
We'll just remember the genius that took her to the top of the world, and in posterity, we'll make sure she stays there.
Bobby Christina explained what Whitney would be like after she came off stage. She would go to Bobby Christina and say, was I okay? Bobby, was Mommy okay tonight? Did I do okay? Did I sing all right? Bobby Christina would always be like, yes, Mommy, you were great, you were great. The public didn't really get to know that side of who she really was, which was sensitive and a tad insecure. And isn't it crazy? You can have all that success and all that fame, and you yourself can't own it. And that's the picture I get from Whitney. She didn't really know how fantastic she was, really. I don't think so.